Left-wing bubbles are full of right-wing air. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and right off the bat, I need to clarify that the title of this video is a tad bit misleading, but I couldn't figure out a good way to keep it brief that would explain what I mean. No, I do not mean to imply that everybody in left-wing urban bubbles is somehow secretly right-wing. What I do mean is something that I think people that live in right leaning areas, or basically anywhere that isn't a major metropolitan area, likely doesn't understand all that well, because I think you'd have to have lived in left wing meccas for a while to really understand this. Regardless as to whether or not you live in New York, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, Seattle, Portland, Miami, Austin, or any other such place known to be full of left-wing people and culture, one thing that tends to be universal is that there are a huge amount of transplants. In New York City, for example, if you live pretty much anywhere in Manhattan, many parts of Brooklyn, or maybe even Astoria, Queens, probably well over 75% of your neighbors are people that did not grow up in New York City. This is true of every city that I mentioned, with the possible exception of Los Angeles, which is just an incredibly massive city geographically with a shit ton of areas that are often totally poor and cheap to live in. So there's a lot of people that grow up in LA and stay in LA. However, every other city has massively inflating rent prices and people that move there because they really want to be in a big city and they don't care how expensive it is. However, if you are in a leftist urban mecca, you can expect for people to ask you where you are from, because so many of these people came from other places. And when you ask them where they are from, you can expect them to tell you that they came from a right-leaning area, or a red state, or flyover state. At which point, you could ask them why they moved to the leftist urban mecca, and they'll have a lot of list of reasons as to why. If they are a gay dude or a transgender person, that by itself will probably be high on the list. If they are a woman that works in a high-powered career, in activism, or in the arts, she'll probably tell you that she moved into the city to go to a specific university and she really liked it and thus stayed. If it's a straight dude, often one that works in tech, he'll very often complain about things like redneck culture and perhaps even toxic masculinity, and how he didn't feel like his idea of a good time was to shoot guns while drunk. That said, a very funny thing happens in these cities, these leftist urban meccas, which I get at a bit in my video Throwing Cyber Rocks from the Ivory Tower, which I'll link in the description and on the end screen. Once people congregate in these urban meccas, one of the things they often do, especially in the LGBT community or maybe on college campuses, is to tell tales about the horrors of their hometowns. They tell them to other people from right-leaning areas as a way to relate to them, and they tell them to guys like myself that have lived entirely in leftist bubbles my entire life, I guess because they want people like me to realize how lucky I am, in their opinion. Really, it's not completely dissimilar to a bunch of gossipy high school girls that have decided to single out people to talk smack about, often exaggerating rumors because humans tend to work best with scapegoats, and in leftist urban meccas, they tend to easily scapegoat the entirety of the right wing and the areas where these people live. At this point, this mentality makes me rather angry because I've personally expended a lot of very specific effort in getting to know people on the political right, and people who live in right-wing areas. And the stories about them that I have always heard from people in leftist bubbles are anything but universally true. Socially and culturally, the right wing has really changed a whole bunch since even just the Bush years. I think probably mainly because of the internet, and people having the ability to communicate with people of all varieties. Still, this doesn't stop people living in leftist meccas that grew up in right-wing towns from thinking that they know all that they need to know about the right wing, and going on to complain about them hubristically. I cannot count how many times I've heard somebody say something to the effect of, "Get to know right-wing people? Thanks, but no thanks. I don't feel like talking to conservatives because I grew up in Texas, and when I moved to San Francisco in 1998, I never looked back, and I don't plan to." Perhaps, Jason, that's precisely your problem. Perhaps while you grew more comfortable with your homosexuality, began getting good at cleaning your asshole so that you could be properly rammed, and eventually became a drag queen, perhaps while that was going on in San Francisco, the people in your hometown learned to realize that the old Jason that they grew up with was probably not that bad of a person. Though granted, the new bitchy SJW drag queen meth-using Jason might just be a total piece of shit that they are better off not knowing. Who knows? That's all I have to say for this video. If you enjoyed it or felt like maybe you learned something from it, please consider donating to me on PayPal or Patreon, links in the description.